The Lost Art of Forgiveness. How to Forget by Forgiving. Forgiving is hard work as a modern thinker. We're trained out of using our emotions to assist in making decisions. Our egos are in charge due to our lack of relationship with any force larger than ourselves. We are rarely trusting. The modern mind prefers to be absolved by another person running their own wounded programming than find their own way of responsible community living, which will always be to find forgiveness via recognition of having resolved the source of the problem. If one can assure the creating that the behaviour won't occur again, then one can also assure the individual and its community safety regarding this error in judgment. To do this, one will need to build an equal value relationship with the creating and accept their equal and yet different roles. Unfortunately, the modern use of ego will not allow this. So the ego must be retired from that position. Seemingly impossible, but not actually. And whole brain living activated. Disbelief suspended, faith attempted, doubt abolished, and a blueprint relationship built with the creating based on full and complete trust. The previous articles in this series have covered all of this in greater detail. Now it's time to share a little bit of the how. The how is my favourite aspect of learning and teaching. Information is important, yet it becomes worth less if not tested and actioned to validate it as true in a person's experience. Testing what we think to come to our own knowledge is paramount to learning the healing of the mind and the body, the community and the society. Anything you know about needs to be lived. Ideas must be experienced through the body to come to just knowing. Let's take a statement and run through how one might test it out in their own experience to come to a conclusion of its truth. One can easily let go of the grudge and emotionally forgive and also forget if they have learned the full lesson which the experience has presented. This is not an easy test, yet from my humble professional and personal perspective, if one were to set out on a quest for truth, this particular truth is definitely worth proving. Keep in mind, a short game perspective will only provide you with disappointment. This test will require commitment and a little bit of abstinence. A long game perspective. You can count your wins if you look closely for the little ones and celebrate them in a way which helps you remember your progress along your road to deep knowing. Oh, and there will be some skills you'll need to develop along the way. If you're having difficulty with making headway, don't be shy. Find a little assistance. None of us learn purely alone. Oh, and don't listen only to one human teacher. Listen to everything. You won't know what or who to believe along the way for quite a while. Just know this is a long journey, and along the road you'll need different kinds of support. If you outgrow one, let them go. Float along until you perceive your next need. The helper will arrive. Just be clear about where you're at and what you feel you need. Let's begin with defining some of the terminology in the statement above so we don't miss anything. Many of the issues human beings have in our learning of forgiveness, trust, faith, love, truth, and other conceptual felt states is the language we're all using to describe them. You see, these concepts are much more right brain ideas than left. They're big and complex and very difficult to put detailed description to. This is because the world we live in is made up of complexity, which we task ourselves with defining. We think we understand a concept when we put language to it, and what actually happens is we lead ourselves to misunderstand it by making it smaller than it truly is. Thought, processed from the conceptual right brain, struggles to be described in its entirety with words. Words are limited. It must be sensed and felt, and the only way to do that is via experience. These concepts truly must be capital K known, rather than only known about. In this section of the article, I'm going to attempt to help you understand how these concepts moved from knowing about to knowing of in my understandings via my own lived experience. Let go of the grudge. I grew up in a grudge-holding family. There was much talk, always, of these justified reasons for enacting attacking behaviour. Other people were fair game, and they were justifications and valid reasons, not excuses. I followed their drift, and I ran the scenarios often in my imaginatory mind, but I don't think I ever went as far as attacking like they did, not consciously. I can still feel the inner fire in my body from remembering these grudge-holding discussions as I write about them. I'm very blessed to have had both my mother and my father. My mother wasn't able to stay in my life and demonstrate physically what a woman does in life. She walked the rainbow into a different dimension when I was a 1-year-old. She was 30. I only had access to her energy after that. And much of my life I didn't have that either. So I was shown every life lesson by a single grudge-holding father. I, however, did not feel obligated to turn into him. I was emotionally obligated to find a man just like him, though, and do as I'm told. That's another story, how I managed to not do that. In regard to becoming a woman, I had no map. That, for anyone, is a difficult situation. Yet once the map making is done, I was free to continue following this map I'd made and am very happy with. I do understand now why humans are wired to bypass the hard work of making a map and just follow one which was created by their parents or their parents' parents, etc. It took all of my productive years to create my own map. So I haven't travelled a traditional road at all. Generally, this creates the situation where many people underestimate what I've come to know purely because they've never had to think about their map until they do. So I was expected to turn into a grudge holder, to belong to my people. And in the end, I couldn't beat that program without rejecting it in its entirety. I can tell you, I had to learn what holding a grudge really felt like as opposed to not holding it. That was the only way I was going to be able to understand it. Looking up a concept in a book, speaking and reading words about it wasn't going to help me decide what I wanted for my map of living. I needed to feel it out. I decided to force myself, consciously, to temporarily let all grudges go. I had to promise my ego, you can have them back if you want them back later. I needed to learn from having the perspective of the other. This is what I learned. With the grudge, my ego felt very powerful. Without the grudge, I felt flat, and I had to feel all the other feelings which were running through my body, like hurt, sadness, fear, etc. With the grudge, I ran a lot of adrenaline through my system, and that had been completely distracting. I'm fairly sure all the problem solving which my ego entered into, fueled by that adrenaline, caused a reliance on dopamine. Dopamine is tricky. It's only being supplied by your brain's instructions while in the plan hatching stage. If you win a battle, everything settles down. My ego had become addicted to these brain chemicals. Grudge holding and hatching plans is nothing more than calling your drug dealer, except your drug dealer is your brain. Without the drugs I was making for myself, I felt my true energy levels in my body, and they were very low. I came to understand that holding grudges is not only intellectually a bad idea, but also unhealthy for my body systems. I'm not a fan of any kind of addiction except coffee. I've spent time away from it, and I just love it too much. So from my experience, via the absence of grudges, I decided to tell my ego something else. Sorry, sweets, you can't hang on to grudges for this reason. We are not going to be vulnerable because of addiction, any addiction. That then meant I had to learn so much more to help my ego be able to feel okay without the grudges. Drug addicts are a nightmare. I didn't want to be my own nightmare. Emotionally forgive. With my ego needing to be consoled and offered some kind of kindness due to the lack of grudge holding, I was left needing to find another way. I needed to be able to recall my personal history and not judge it, good or bad. I needed to be able to recall my personal history and not judge it, good or bad. I needed to find a perspective which would help me disassociate myself from my strong emotions about things that happen around me and to me. In the beginning, I used my intellect to guide me and my will to slow down my emotional thinking. I would choose a memory, which I usually get quite fired up about. Then I would try to stop it mid-emotion and catch my ego in the act. Take that snapshot to my intellect and pull apart and analyze it to death. It was a skill I learned through much practice. I would write the issue down. I would then make myself read it back. I would try to use it a bit like a text I'd studied at high school or university. I'd find the themes, I'd find the symbols, and then I decided to see this text using my imagination through the eyes of each character in the story. I knew how I felt about it, and I could outline why. I needed to get some insight into why the other characters were saying what they were saying and doing what they were doing. Why were they making choices the way they had? This was the turning point. First of all, looking at my story as a story rather than my story was key. Then I pulled it apart before putting it back together from a different perspective. When I put myself into the perspective of another character and imagined from my most informed truth, I would find understanding around the entire issue. It would soften. If I walked around the clock far enough, what I now call the perspective clock, I would come to the ultimate moment of my ego's surrender. When I walked and talked with each character, like interviewing them, I would feel how they might have felt. When I realised my grandmother was tired and was cornered into more work, when all she'd hoped for and planned on for many, many years was to rest and create her craft, I understood her context of being already upset before our conflict. Of course I understood. I'd had things like that happen to me. I'd been already upset many times in my life. My life wasn't hard in the same way as hers was. Of course, I could forgive her. So I began in my own position on the perspective clock, and I walked around and around until I held in my heart the emotional drivers of all the characters who were in the story. Once I'd opened myself to the extended story, it wasn't my story anymore. I was just a character in a much larger play. The perspective clock enabled me to learn how to live as a part of a community where everyone is of the same value with different jobs and roles to play. Everyone has a past which has set them up to be already upset in some kind of way. Through emotional perspective widening, I was able to learn to forgive and forget if, with the grudge holding decided away and replaced by walking myself around the perspective clock, I only really needed to figure out how to get myself to forget. An interesting concept. Let me explain it a little more deeply. Compassionate understanding of other people's emotional drivers will often bring you to forgiveness. Yet, it doesn't ensure that you won't still hold a bit of a grudge. I forgave a lot. I didn't get angry about very much anymore. Yet, in the beginning of learning this process, I was still thinking about things here and there. I was still thinking about it occasionally as if something just wasn't complete. My feelings were right. I wasn't yet forgetting. This concept of forgetting isn't amnesic. It's a kind of forgetfulness where there is just no need to be reminded. If you can forgive, you won't have emotional triggers reminding you. If you get forgetful about it, you won't have intellectual reminders of it either. Indeed, if you need to remember it, you'll be able to pull it back up into your mind, but you won't have any random reasons to be remembering. This was the next trick I needed to learn. How would I get forgetful? Why was I still having this unresolved memory pop into my thoughts? What was I missing? Due to being a born teacher, I do it even when it's not my job, I think about learning all the time. You can say I wear glasses that colour. I thought I should investigate what I'd not yet learned. Perhaps it was coming back to remind me to complete something. In the example with my grandmother above, I had great empathy for her, but I did not like how her unresolved mental wounds were treating me. Although I had empathy, I don't think I had assurance of protection from it in the future. I was never going to be able to ensure safety by changing her. I had to figure out what I could change in me to create the protection. In this example, I discovered that I needed to learn what she was actually saying, what the truth really was. I looked into it further, more deeply and in more detail. It turns out she was feeling very overwhelmed and needed me to stop saying certain things which were triggering her mind. She had a very defensive ego. She wasn't able to tell me straight up what she needed and why, so she manipulated me to change my course. She had a way of flipping kindness into cruelty. She could turn on a dime. So I taught myself about what her behaviour really meant. If I could reframe the meaning of it, I could change course in a motion of empathy and cause her to calm down. I learned what her triggers were. She was a little too set in her ways for me to offer her any help to heal her wounds, and honestly, I wasn't as good at doing it as I am now. So I moved my words for her comfort, and we both stayed safe. Sometimes the one who knows better just has to go first. Learned the full lesson. The last part of the sentence is quite important for a modern thinker learning these skills. The modern person gets very impatient. We want a method to work the first time we do it. Unfortunately, all high-level skills take hours of practice. In this case, one has to learn a little at a time in the beginning. The more often you apply the perspective clock and then learn from what appears and reappears, you'll not only learn how to do it and do it well, eventually you'll learn to do it quickly. Something that took up as much of my time as the drama did now is all experienced and processed in a matter of hours, and I'm tucked up in bed feeling assured I've dealt with the entirety of the matter. I sleep well because I'm highly skilled at this process, and I know if I've missed anything, it will reappear the next day, and I'll learn the rest then. Now you know more about this process, but until you take it on and play with it, test it out, you'll not own it. You'll not have it as yours. You'll not capital K know of it. From my experiences, once I came to know this process and feel the safety I experienced after having applied it to all areas of my identity, I never choose another method of inner self-resolution. I've made these broad concepts suit myself so I can reach my very high standards. Now I have conversations with Mum and the creating where I hear myself saying things like, I am so grateful for the upgrades I've received. I've forgotten how difficult that situation was. Now that it's all over, I won't mind at all if you want to try to test me. I'd love to know if they can get close to me now. I'd love to move up the upgrade ladder. I'm ready. That is a far cry from my first walk around the perspective clock. Strive for knowing and begin with knowing about, plus the commitment to test the ideas with your experiences. Get your results. Get your proof. Know what is true for you. Hi, I'm Joanna Ruth from Tarot with JoannaRuth.Online. Hi, I'm Joanna Ruth, and this is your doorway to spiritual literacy. Why not come on in and learn some foundations together?